What's up, y'all? It's Josh here. We'll get started with the episode with Tyler in just a minute, but before we do so, I just wanted to take a second to express my gratitude for you. Whether you're watching on YouTube, you're listening on Apple Podcasts or Spotify, your support literally means the world to me. If you haven't subscribed yet or hit that 5-star review, I encourage you to do so because each one of those things matters. Towards the end of the podcast, Tyler talks about a building called the Hope Center, which I'm going to put the link down below so you can check out a little bit more about it. But this is going to be a 28,000 square foot indoor year-round recreational facility for individuals with special needs. They're going to have a basketball arena, a wheelchair accessible zip line, and so many more things inside of there. So if you feel led to do so, I invite you all to donate with me in this amazing cause. I'm going to put the link down below and make sure you click the Hope Center when you choose your cause. I'm really excited for you all to listen into what Tyler has to share with us today in episode 3. Breaking silence and shifting perspective. Welcome back to Approach the Climb, the podcast where we talk about real stories, strategies, and insights to help you on your personal climb to success. And if you haven't already, make sure you go subscribe to our YouTube channel. My goal is to have 1,000 subscribers by the end of the year, and I know we're going to get there with your support, so thank you for that in advance. But I'm so excited to have our guest on today. He is the Executive Director of the Nuxhall Foundation. He oversees the Joe Nuxhall Miracle League Fields, the Character Education Fund, and the Memorial Scholarship, and I'm sure a ton of other things that aren't listed in that as well that we'll talk about here in a little bit. But more than that, Tyler is a huge mental health advocate. He created a blog called See Above after his father became a victim of suicide in 2013. And through that, he's been able to share his story of his dad and also just ways that God has brought him through that wilderness on his journey. And above that, he is also a husband and he is a father of 2 boys. And Tyler, I'm excited to have you on the show.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I'm excited to be here, and great podcast that you're doing, and excited to be on.
Yeah, I reached out to Kim Nuxhall, as I mentioned, and he mentioned your name. I know he thinks really highly of you, and after hearing your story and getting the ability to share it with our audience, I'm really excited for it.
Well, Kim is one of those guys who when I look back at what happened with my dad, I often talk about God kind of bringing these tent pole people, right? People who were going to help hold the tent up in my dad's absence, and they all kind of fulfilled different roles that my dad had held in my life. And Kim was one of those people that got brought into my life in preparation of this kind of being on the horizon. And he's just been such a tremendous person to me. One of the best teacher that I never had, right? I never had him in gym class, but he has taught me more about life and how to treat people and humility than anybody I know. So he's a special guy, and I'm glad he connected us.
Yeah, he's one of the kindest humans I know, and that's so awesome to have that mutual between us. Yeah. So, you're like a super Cincinnati guy. We talk about obviously you're the executive director over there at the Nuxhall Foundation, but before we get started into what we're going to talk about, I want to talk about this cheese coney situation.
Okay, the situation.
It's called a situation. So for those of you that don't know, in Cincinnati, we absolutely love our chili. We love it so much we put it on spaghetti and pretty much everything else.
Anything.
So in doing the show and things like that, I send out a questionnaire and I say, tell me an interesting fact about yourself. And Tyler, I don't know if you want to go ahead and share how many cheese conies.
Yeah, my record is 9. So and I'm so upset that I didn't just get the round number at 10, right? No, and I was actually I was trying to remember when this was. I was 12 or 13 years old.
Oh my goodness.
And I always had a big appetite as a kid, and I loved Skyline. And I remember my dad being there, and I ate 3, which was my typical order. And I said, I feel like I could eat a couple more. So I went back and I kept ordering them in rounds of 2, right? And so I did that a couple more times until I got to 9. And I actually could have done more. And I guess there's my dad was only willing to go so far, right?
Yeah.
So he was
we gotta cut this kid off.
Yeah, Child Protective Services is going to be called if I let you go to 10.
Oh my goodness!
So 9 was my record, and I never went back and tried it again. My wife is probably cringing watching.
She's like, oh no.
Yeah. She's I need to clean up my diet, and this is probably not the best story to tell.
Yeah. Your boys are going to watch this one day and go like, I can beat that.
Yeah, I know. Yeah, I hope. Right? It's the legacy you want to live. Yeah.
That's so cool. Yeah. And just, thinking about Skyline and thinking about just Cincinnati as a whole, one of the things looking at the Nuxhall Foundation, headed up by was Joe Nuxhall,
Yeah.
and he had all these things that he was doing. And you talk about your time kind of growing up, listening to him and Marty Brenneman, just cast the Reds. And then you have this opportunity to work for the organization where he has started these legacies. So talk a little bit about what that's like for you and what keeps you motivated in that.
Gosh, it's one of those moments that you look back on and the divine intervention that came into making this happen. Because growing up, um, maybe because all I did was eat cheese coneys, I was a horrible athlete, right?
Yeah.
I came from a family where everybody played sports, and I was that kid, right? I was the bad kid on the t-ball team, and like soccer, basketball, no matter what. Like I was just always a pretty bad athlete, and but I loved sports. I always loved competition, and I knew I wanted to stay involved somehow. And I got started as a sports announcer. So I was a student at Miami Hamilton, and was walking down the hallway. And I'd always kind of wanted to do sports announcing. And I saw this flyer on the bulletin board that said they were looking for the next PA announcer for the athletic department. So I grabbed the ticket and called the athletic director and went in and did an interview, which was actually ironically just reading a hot dog advertisement. It was they put this in front of me, and it was Oscar Mayer, and they weren't even like the official sponsor, but they just made this up. And I read it, and they gave me the job, and did some announcing for a couple different teams while I was in college. And then when I graduated college, they started the Hamilton Joes. It was a wood bat baseball team, a summer collegiate team that played in Hamilton, and it was named after Joe Nuxhall. And I was fortunate that the guy who coached the Miami Hamilton team was the coach down there, and he brought me on. And really the best blessing that came out of that was getting to know Kim Nuxhall and the rest of the Nuxhall family. I had grown up listening to Marty and Joe in my backyard every night in and night out. And then all of a sudden to be announcing for this team that had his J on the uniform, and to see what that meant to the family and to all the people who loved Joe. I mean, it was just kind of that special moment. And Kim actually brought me out to MC a charity softball game that was happening, and I went out, and just on a regular field, one of the parks in Fairfield, and it was local celebrities along with special needs players. And I remember emceeing that event, and really it was one of those kind of soul convicting moments, right, where you started to see people in wheelchairs and walkers and with severe developmental disabilities playing the game of baseball. And I remember sitting down at the end of that game, once everything concluded, just kind of reflecting on the entire thing. And Kim came up, and I just shared with him. I said, man, I just feel like a jerk, because this community has been all around me my entire life, but I never once thought, what do they do on Friday nights? What do they do on Saturday? What types of opportunities are there for them to play baseball and other sports? And Kim said, well, if you thought this year was cool, next year we're going to have a special facility built just for these individuals. And the next year they opened the Miracle League fields. And it's just amazing to look back on it and to think, one year I know nothing about this, and then the next year I'm standing helping with the ribbon cutting.
Right.
And I got involved as a board member down there, did some announcing, and then as we started thinking about how do we protect Joe's legacy 20, 30, 40 years down the road, we knew that there was going to be a need to put somebody in a permanent position. So Kim and the board members said, well, why don't you write the job description for what that person might look like? And I'm writing the thing, and I'm like, gosh, this all sounds like stuff I want to do. So I said, here's the job description you asked for, and here's my resume. And 2 years ago made the jump. And it never fails to amaze me. I have a Marty and Joe bobblehead on my desk. When I was a kid, I got that bobblehead when Great American Ballpark opened in 2003, and they were celebrities, right? I had their bobblehead, and now to think that I have the connection I do to Joe's name, but also getting to know Marty. And I got to, when he was still announcing, Kim took me down to Great American, and I got to sit next to him
So cool.
in the broadcast booth for a couple innings. And I'm still starstruck anytime I'm around him. But
Yeah.
he's just such an incredible guy. So I'm lucky. I'm very lucky. I'm very blessed. I've had so many good people come into my life at just the right time when I didn't even know I'd need them. And the dots have all, between God and all these people, the dots have all been connected for me beautifully. So, yeah, it's a real honor to do what I do, and it motivates me knowing that I'm carrying forward a legacy for a guy and a family that I care deeply about. Makes a huge difference.
Yeah, it's so cool. And, you just talk about God bringing people into our
Hmm.
life. And, I think back in my life, and
Hmm.
so many times I look at that, and
Yeah.
you may not know it at the time
Right.
or and when it's happening, but you look back after and you're like, man, God really was
Yeah.
playing a huge role in this.
You
So,
do, and it reinforces this whole idea that there's something bigger that's controlling what's happening, and to me, a guy who my life's been hit with some pretty unexpected things,
right.
both good and bad. Um, that's so encouraging.
Yeah.
It's so uplifting to know that in spite of all my kind of individual mistakes that I make down here at the local level, that there's a bigger plan going on, and that I'm a small part of that, but a part of that God sees as important, and you are, and everybody listening, and things like
Yeah.
that. It's really encouraging, especially when things feel a little bit out of control.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And, I just want to shift a little bit when you talk about
Hmm.
feeling out of control.
Yeah.
And, you know, I think about your blog,
Yeah.
See Above, and you creating that. And
Hmm.
I read through a lot of the posts in there. And for you all that are listening, I encourage you, I'm going to put the link down below. Please go and just read these stories that Tyler has written, just for you to be able to share some of that stuff and have that avenue. I think when we think about grief and loss, things like that are very important. I think
Yeah.
anybody would encourage,
Yeah.
anyone going through something like that. Hey, you need
Yeah.
to find an avenue that's a safe space. And you've kind of created that with this blog and with the passing of your father. And, I want to talk about a little bit about just your personal
Hmm.
experience, maybe talk about that time in your
Yeah.
life, and just what got you through a lot of that storm.
Yeah. I mean, I was a junior in high school before I knew anything was even wrong. Came home one day, and my mom is there with my grandpa and my dad's boss, and they said, we don't know where your dad is. And come to find out, his entire adult life he had been struggling with depression and managed it well in some seasons and not so well in others. And
Yeah.
this was one of those not so well seasons. Was very fortunate that about 3 days later, he was located at a rest stop in Indiana. He was asleep in his truck. And I remember when my dad got home, um, I I was furious. I had an a very elementary understanding of mental illness, and even at that level, the wrong one.
Right.
I felt like my dad had run out on us. I felt like my dad had abandoned my mom and I, and I remember just reacting so coldly and hatefully towards him when he got
Yeah.
home, and over time that softened and things got back to normal. I was an only child, so very close with my parents,
Right.
and my dad and I really had a special relationship. um, and he had a couple more episodes. I was thankful that my own perspective on mental illness changed, and as much as as hokey as this sounds, it changed because I started struggling myself. I suffer from clinical anxiety. I had a It all stems from a really traumatic hospital stay I had in my early 20s.
Yeah.
Kind of convinced myself that I had some kind of disease that the doctors couldn't explain or diagnose, and went into this stage for about 9 months where I could not function.
Mm.
I could only eat 8 cheese coneys instead of 9. But I
Yeah.
mean, I lost, against my will, lost, 35 pounds, couldn't eat, couldn't sleep. And I didn't share it with anybody. I kept it
Yeah.
all bottled up. And I remember when I finally, about 9 months into that, broke down and I told my parents. My dad had every right in the world, based on the way I had treated him, to say, buck up, get over it.
Yeah.
And instead, both he and my mom just kind of, put their arms around me and they said, "We don't know how. We're going to get you better, but you are going to get better." And whether it was medication or physical fitness or going to see a therapist, which I still to this day go once a month. Um, it all kind of worked together and helped me to get better. Um, Kind of glad I had that perspective change because back in 2013, got a call from my mom that my dad was just not in a good place. Went home to talk to him, and it was pretty clear that things were bad.
Yeah.
He was just very disconnected from kind of everything happening around him, and we talked for 10 minutes or so. I told him I loved him. He told me he loved me back, and went home. And about an hour later, got a phone call that I needed to get home. And this time, when I came home, knew things were bad. There were
Yeah.
ambulances and police lights. And when I got to the front door, my mom's boss was there, and he just kind of grabbed me by the shoulder and said, the paramedics are working to save your dad's life, but we
Yeah.
just don't know. And about 10 minutes after that, my grandpa emerged from the house and came up to my mom and to me and just hugged us and just said he's gone. So my dad was 50 years old when he became a victim of suicide, and you have this tendency to look at the lives of other people and see that they're going through things, but it never really feels like it's going to hit your own home.
Right.
And I mean, truthfully, you could have asked me every day, 10 times a day in the years leading up to this, will your family ever be affected or impacted by mental illness or suicide? And I would have said no. My dad was a happy guy. He loved life. And he was, I mean, the thing we heard at his funeral more than anything else was we had no idea. We had no idea he was hurting. He was struggling. He was very much of a personality style, like a Robin Williams. He loved making people
Yeah.
laugh. He was outgoing. He was energetic. He was talkative. But people didn't see behind the scenes. Not, I mean, even our my mom and I didn't see some of the
Right.
the sadness and the despair that was there. Um, and it's been 10 years since losing my dad, and um, the grief changes. It doesn't. I always go back and forth with this idea, like, do things get better? Do things get easier? And I don't know what the difference is between those two. The reality is, have good things happened in my life after losing my dad? Of course, not because of losing him, right? But they've
Right.
happened because life is good and it's a gift from God. I got married to a girl who is so out of my league. It's fantastic. I don't
Yeah.
know if you married up like I
I
did, but
I
it's
sure
great.
did.
Like it's
Yeah.
awesome.
It is.
But she is everything I never knew I needed in a partner, and we have two beautiful little boys, and um, those good things have happened. But along that journey, there's always been that semblance of, I wish my dad could have met Paige. I
Right.
wish my dad could have gotten to experience being a grandfather. I wish my dad could have gotten to experience promotions at work and retirement. I wish he could have gotten to experience all the good things happening out at the Miracle League fields, right? There's always that. So it's not that things get easier or better. It's just that they change.
Right.
But the common denominator in all of that has been God stays the same and doesn't change, and that's been reliable. That the stability of my wife, my children, my family, all of those things, that doesn't change. Knowing that I've got people there who love me, people like Kim and countless mentors that I've had, alongside the work I'm
Right.
doing. Um, so that's what has I think encouraged me throughout that journey, knowing that I'm going to be having questions about this until the day I die, and that's okay. I'm
Right.
not going to ever have all the answers. I'm going to be dealing with different parts of this, but just knowing that I've got some of those strong foundational things I can hold on to, regardless of what changes at the surface
Yeah.
level. There's stuff underneath I've got that's not going to move.
Yep.
That's been the rock I needed throughout all this.
Yeah. And I think, just thinking about what you've shared with us so far, and I think back again to God putting the right people in your life
Hmm.
at the right time to make sure that, you're
Yeah,
not going to have all the answers,
yeah,
but maybe there's a way that they're going to help you shift your
yeah,
perspective
yeah,
or help you understand
yeah,
something a little better. And, for everyone listening, I think the encouragement to you is that, one, if you're going through things, look around.
hmm,
Don't internalize it. I think the more we internalize, the more things can
yeah,
build up, and time is not going to make things better. Community is going to
yeah,
make things better. Friends are going to make things better. Safe spaces.
yeah,
So I think you just talking through that reminds me
yeah,
that I am also that person in other people's
yeah,
lives. If I see someone struggling, it's
yeah,
important for me to acknowledge that
yeah,
in them, because maybe people don't have the courage to speak up, and maybe they want to say, I'm going to be quiet until someone comes and talks to me. And it's up to people like me to come out and say, "Hey, how's it going?"
yeah.
Like I noticed, if I see somebody, something as silly as not posting on Facebook
Right.
after a while,
Yeah,
just it's easy to send a message.
yeah,
It's easy to send a text,
yeah.
to call someone. So
And it
if
is. It's always a bit. You don't quite know how to lead into that conversation of just bringing up out of the blue, hey, I'm really dealing with a lot of things that are making my anxiety worse, or depression, or bipolar, whatever it may be, right? But if somebody gives you that on ramp or that platform to open the door to that conversation, makes a world of difference.
yeah,
And that I think is the important thing I learned in my dad's story was, I've been fortunate that I don't fault my dad for what happened. I
right,
have never, and I can say that with the utmost sincerity, I've never once been mad at my dad, or angry at him. I've been angry at mental illness.
yeah,
I've been angry at kind of some of the societal things that keep us, especially as males, from sharing openly when we're struggling or when we're
right,
hurting. Um, but the one thing, my dad just really had trouble taking the mask off, and he didn't want to go to see a therapist. He didn't want to talk about it openly or
right,
things, and I kind of made the decision, that this was going to stop with my generation in our family line, and I said I'm gonna talk about this. I'm gonna just open the door, and I hope that you know hope that by the time my sons are my age, they live in a world that's a little bit more open to having these conversations,
right,
because we can, flashlight's no good unless you got a dark spot to shine it in, and that's kind of
yeah.
the situation here. But we've got to be willing to open up and talk about them. It makes a world of difference.
Yeah, so it sounds like to me, your encouragement for others that may be struggling in silence
Yeah.
would be to just try
Yeah.
try to speak up about it, because
Yeah.
like we've said, time is not going to do its
Yeah.
thing, and the right people are going to be around at the
Yeah.
right time. And it can be discouraging to hold those things in, and
Again.
even to get shut down.
Mhm.
Think about when you talk about the stigma around males and mental health and
Yeah.
things like that, it may make you feel kind of less tough to share those
Mhm.
things. But again, you could be so much more tougher if you
Right.
like let those
Yeah.
things out. It's
Yeah.
we're not defined
Yeah.
by a lot of that stuff. We just have to let it
And
go.
you have to find the platform that works for you, right? Like,
Yeah,
for a lot of people, it's daunting to think about sharing a personal diagnosis or struggle with mental illness, because of you get scared of, oh my gosh, everybody's going to know. That's not what I'm saying, right?
right.
Like, talk with somebody. That can be, if it's, I tend to cope well by sharing with larger groups.
Yeah,
For other people, it might just be sharing with your spouse,
Yeah.
sharing with a pastor, sharing with a counselor, sharing with a trusted colleague, a friend, something along those lines. And I'm not saying that everybody has to stand on a stage or jump on a podcast and talk about their deepest struggles, right? But if you
Right.
talk with one person about it, or if you talk with two people about it, it might start to normalize how you're feeling. You might start to connect and bond over I'm feeling that way too, or I've dealt with that, or whatever it may be. So I do think though there's real power in being able to take that mask off and just to let people know we're hurting and we're struggling, because we all are in some way, shape, or form.
Right.
But it's about how much we're willing to let people in to help with that I think makes a huge difference.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I have a funny story just about sharing struggles. I recently got involved back in a small group at our church, and
Yeah.
one of the guys was talking about bedtime with his two
Okay.
boys
Yeah.
and how it just gets
It's chaos.
frustrating at times,
Yeah.
or the
Yeah.
kids, like, maybe if it's just him, they're really good for him, but when his wife gets around, they maybe get like whiny because
Uh-huh.
kids seem to be more connected to
Yeah.
mom at
They want
times.
mom.
Yeah, so he shares that, and all of us sitting around were like, that same thing
Right.
happens to
Right.
us.
Yep.
So like you said, you may
Yeah.
share something and someone says, you know what? That's the exact same
Yeah.
thing that I'm feeling. And this is
Yeah.
what I did to help.
And that's why mental illness is so different and so pervasive, right? Is because, and I wrote a series. I've been a churchgoer, my whole life, and I wrote a series on the blog a while back where I talked about our inability, ironically, to talk about mental illness in the church. And when I say the church, I'm not talking about like my home church. I'm talking the larger
Yeah.
Christian church. And the analogy that I always gave there was, if you had a broken leg, right, would you go into church and try to like hide the fact that you're wearing a cast and, oh my gosh, everybody's gonna think I don't drink enough milk and they're gonna think I have osteoporosis and all this stuff, and you,
Yeah.
you wouldn't go into this tailspin, right? But with mental illness, we do, because we're worried that people are going to say we're crazy. They're going to say that we're unhinged, whatever it may be. And I think when we get to a point where we as a church, we as a society can talk more openly about things like mental illness, it's not going to hold that same power over our life,
Yeah.
because it's bad enough to deal with depression or anxiety, but then to have to deal with guilt and shame and all these things on top of it
Right.
just exacerbates the original problem even more. So I do think talking about it in some way, shape, or form, whether that's talking about it one to one, social media, whatever it may be, is beneficial. And I think the more we do that, the more likely we are. It's never going to go away, but our
Right.
paths to treatment and to healing and to getting better are going to become more available if we're talking about it.
Yeah. That's the only way to help anything,
Yeah.
like you said, is
Yeah.
just bring light to it.
Right.
Shine that flashlight on that darkness,
Yep.
because it is definitely there.
Yeah.
It is prevalent, and you're right. I
Yeah.
think it does need to be talked
Yeah.
about
For
more.
sure.
So we talk about the Nuxhall Foundation,
Mhm.
and we talked about you kind of stepping into that legacy that Joe Nuxhall led. We did talk a lot about your dad, the
Mhm.
legacy that he's left, and thinking about the blog that you've created and all of these things. The next question I want to ask you, and I didn't plan for this, but you know, what legacy is it that you want to leave behind?
Mm. Um, hmm. For me, I know this probably sounds crazy. Like I don't think a lot about like um, wanting to be remembered for anything. I
Yeah.
know that's probably a strange thing to say. Um, I think more about using the time I'm here wisely in a way to help other people, um,
Yeah.
and in a way that I don't need anybody to know who I was or anything like that, but I need them to have a better quality of life as a result of me having been here. Um, I think about the Miracle League fields, right? And I think about athletes with really severe challenges that never had a place to play. And now all of a sudden, you go out there on any given Friday or Saturday, and there are athletes as young as 4 years old, athletes as old as 80 years old playing the game of baseball, a game that Joe loved. Like, that to me, one of our board members, I remember standing with him out at the fields one night during our adult league, and just remember him saying, like, where else would these individuals be on a Friday night if not for this place? They
Yeah.
wouldn't be together. They wouldn't
Right.
be experiencing this common sense of community. We're pushing really hard to build an indoor facility for our athletes called the Hope Center.
Very cool.
It'll be a year-round recreational facility, about 30,000 square feet, an indoor facility that'll allow them to play basketball and do fitness classes and have adaptable recreational equipment and all these things, kind of give them the permanent home that they deserve.
Yeah.
And it's hard work. I mean, it's a $10 million building.
Yeah.
Good news is we've raised about 2 million of that.
That's awesome.
Bad news is, if you know how to do math, we got about 8 to go. You said I could put you down, I think, for $1.5 million or something like that.
Maybe
proceeds for
maybe
the
one day.
podcast.
Yeah.
Okay.
How about that? Proceeds of the
All right,
podcast.
yeah. So it, but like that, as difficult as that work is, it's worth it, right? It's worth the investment of time. It's worth the investment of energy. Like it's worth working so hard that you go to bed at night just exhausted.
Yeah.
Because you see the impact it'll make. The blog. I want to create a world where my boys can talk openly when they're struggling. I want them to. Selfishly, I want them to know who their grandfather was and that his life wasn't defined by an illness,
Yeah.
but that he lived a really impactful life. I want my wife to feel loved every day, and the reality is I come up short in a lot of these areas,
Yeah.
and on a daily basis, but I just keep going back to the fact that if I take what I understand as the purpose for my life that God has given me and just try every day to put that out there and make others' lives better because of it. That's what it's all about for me, is trying to help them.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think that's awesome. I mean, just thinking about the world being a better place, and it's one person at a time, right? And I think it's so cool the impact through the Nuxhall Foundation, through the blog, through your family and your boys, that you're gonna set them off on this path to be able to create that space, to create that community, to open up authentic conversations for people to have about mental illness.
Yeah.
And I think it's wonderful the work that you're doing.
Thank you.
I'm honored to have you on this podcast and just to share your story with our audience. I know that they're grateful for it as well.
Well, I appreciate you giving the platform, and it's just a real good thing that this kind of conversation is happening, and that you're helping people. And I know you're sharing a lot of your personal journey and things. I started thinking, I know you're on a big weight loss journey right now, and I was like, gosh, what a jerk I am sending him that I ate 9 cheese Coneys and he's lost like 70 pounds.
Yeah, no, we need to. Yeah, we'll go have some cheese Coneys sometime.
Okay, all right, we can do that.
Once I feel like I'm not going to sit down and eat 9, I got to learn that moderation first. And
we all need that.
Then we'll get back at it. Because my wife gets on me too sometimes.
Yeah. Thank God for them. Right.
But yeah, thank you so much just for being here and for talking about some of this stuff. If you guys want to connect with Tyler at all, I'm going to put the links all down below, ways that you can interact with him, for the blog, for the Nuxhall Foundation. But other than that, that's all that we have for today. Tyler, did you have anything that you wanted to close out with?
No, I just, thanks to everybody for listening. And it's always kind of a hard story for me to tell, but I'm always just amazed at the compassion that people show when you tell it, and the grace that people give you when you don't even quite know what words to put to something like that.
Right.
And it's always, for me, it's just such a blessing when people go on and read the blog, because I know it takes time to sit down and read a long post, but I miss my dad every day, and when people go on and read the blog, it really feels like, okay, people cared about my dad and who he was and what he stood for, and that's always just very touching and encouraging. It's helped me grieve throughout this entire process. So thankful to you for letting me share my story, and to everybody for listening.
Absolutely. Yeah. Thank you so much. And for everybody out there, we wish you the best on your personal climb to success.